Thank you very much, Pamir and Gulnar, for organizing the third CoinSummit conference. It's been a really good event, as have previous events been. They've served a really good function to catalyze this ecosystem that emerged on SourceForge in 2009, and then was incubated sort of a bit in the woods, as it were, in hackathons and grungy cafes, and all of a sudden it caught on to the mainstream last year, and Bitcoin became the talk of the town. And this clever new technology all of a sudden was worth billions. And such things have happened before. It's a new technology which does very useful things, but at the periphery of an existing industry, which is financial services. But about 10 years ago, there emerged, out of voice over IP, out of all that culture and innovation, there emerged Skype at the boundary or the fringes of an existing established industry which has its own set of regulations and laws and rules and traditions, right? Michael, you were inside Skype when it was growing, when it was sort of going stratospheric, and what was it like?
There's a lot of similarities between us then and the Bitcoin industry today, and I think we should look at some of those similarities to see if we can learn anything. I mean, the first thing was we were at the junction of an old industry and a new technology. So we were basically providing similar services, but into old technology. And old technology was an old regulatory framework, an old set of opinions, an old set of contracts and things that simply didn't apply. It wasn't that you could twist them over, they just didn't apply. It didn't work that way. You were trying to go in two different dimensions with what you were talking about. So that was the first thing. And of course, that was exciting. The second thing was we were fortunate in running a decentralized architecture, a decentralized company. There was no central point of control with that, just like Bitcoin. There is nobody running Bitcoin. There is nobody running Skype. There was a company behind it, but they were just doing the software development. If the company stopped existing, the product would continue. People would still be able to call each other. People would be able to do video. It's out of control. So you could say to the regulators, you're discussing with them, well, it's all right, you can close me down, you can do what the hell you think you want to do, but like, it's not going to help because everybody's still going to be talking to each other. And that's a very powerful position to be in when you're talking to these people, because they don't know what's going on either, right? And they're interested in learning, the same as today. We hear presentations every country we go to. We see regulators coming in and talking to us and wanting to learn and stuff like that. But we need to set the agenda for these guys. We're spending too much time now going to them and saying, oh, how should we behave? And what license should we apply for? And what do you think? And all of that. We shouldn't be doing that. My view is we should be going to them and saying, look, we've got what we've got to do. If you want to regulate this, if you want to control it, if you want to manage it, I mean, okay, make the rules and we'll talk about it. But until then, like, come on, give us a break.
So essentially, you operated on the outside. You tried to skirt the periphery, and you're saying this is so completely new. The old rules are not really entirely relevant at this stage, right?
Exactly, and we made efforts. We took some sacrifices within the company to make that, within the product to make that. For example, it's very difficult to call from the existing phone network to a Skype telephone or a Skype device, right? You basically can't do it except in a very few countries. And that's because when you start to connect yourself too tightly into that, then you do fall into the regulatory frameworks, and then you start to have a lot of complications. We just didn't want to do that. We couldn't manage, and nobody in the Bitcoin world can manage a regulatory framework that spans 190 or 212 different countries, right? You just can't do it. One country will say everything needs to be blue, and the other country will say everything needs to be white, and it just doesn't work, right? And these guys, we have to educate them and tell them that there are some things which is fine, because we have rules and anti-money laundering and terrorism and all of this stuff. We're not going to escape that, unfortunately, much as we want to. But there are a lot of other things around it where there's no need for you to go near this thing.
So Constance, you've been out there. You've worked for Bitcoin startups out there trying to build product or service, bring it to users in various countries, right? And now you're advising Bitcoin companies, right? What is it like in the trenches today? And how does it compare to Skype and voice over IP, do you think? Go ahead, please.
Yes, so, gosh, I'm just thinking about where we were a year ago to today. I think we were at CoinSummit, was around the same time, we were on the same panel, and the conversation has changed so much. You know, this is a new technology, and then on top of that, you have new companies. And so not only do they have to first understand the technology, but then you have to build credibility around the technology, and then also around your team and your product and what you're actually offering. So, you know, back a year ago, or even over a year ago, a lot of these conversations as you are trying to forge a bank partnership or you are trying to obtain regulatory clearance, often in that room, you were explaining the technology for the first time, and so you had to lend credibility to that. And then on top of that, you were introducing a new company. So, today, Google is a household name, but maybe in the very beginning, Google would have had to show outside external kind of references for why this company has credibility. So, just translating the product, the team, and the mission to stakeholders, showing the value proposition, showing how you have the regulatory frameworks under control, that you have a strategy. Those have been really important points to get across in any kind of meeting. And I think the other challenge, I think, is the fact that this is a global technology and it's very new and there are many, many innovations that are around it. So, whether you're an exchange or whether you are building another product or service on top of the blockchain or other altchains, or entering into kind of the ledger properties of these new technologies, there are a million things that you can do, and I think that being focused and knowing what problem you're solving as a company is incredibly important. So, those are kind of the practical challenges that we encountered. And, one of my favorite copyright cases, actually, there's a judge came out, I remember, when he came out with this ruling was, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And in this space, this is an entirely new asset class, and it walks like a payment instrument, and it talks like a currency, and it swims like a mutual fund. It just so in many ways, this is we're encountering similar problems that Skype did back in the day, and that first of all, you have regulators who don't understand the technology, and then you have regulators who think they understand, and that they're applying let's say mail fraud rules to email. So a lot of, I think that as a business, it's very important to know what the obvious kind of landmines are in these different regulatory frameworks. Unfortunately, that's expensive. It takes a little bit of legwork. But once you know the lay of the land, I think it's also important to know that there are many open questions and that there are gray areas, and there are ways of navigating that gray area that don't hamper your business. So just giving an example, last year when we were, here at CoinSummit in London on level 39, I think we had just talked to FinCEN for the first time, and the question that came up in FinCEN was, what's wrong with the dollar? And then, here we were, Data, which is the self-regulatory organization for this industry that Patrick and I are both original founders of. Data put on a conference in April, and the same regulators from FinCEN, the SEC, the IRS were in that room this April. And the conversation was not what's wrong with the dollar, and I don't know why Bitcoin exists. The conversation was, we understand this is innovative. We understand we need to figure a way out of it. We have a public policy mandate, but we don't want to strangle innovation. So you had a 180 kind of turn from some of the conversations we were having a year ago to the conversations that we're having today. And what's important for people in this room to know in terms of what that is signaling is that they understand that this technology is here to stay. And they understand that they don't know what it means, and they don't know how to regulate it. And so there's a vacuum right now of answers. And that answer can be met by regulators, or that answer can be met by a robust ecosystem of products and services that people use. So, I'm a lawyer, I wouldn't caution anyone to break the law, but, this is a new asset class. There are many names that you can put onto it, and in many ways it acts like other asset classes. So, the risk metrics of a technology that works completely differently are going to be different as well, and the regulators understand that. So, know where the obvious touch points are. If you're an exchange or a wallet, you're likely going to be regulated and need some sort of agency or oversight. But if you are building products that are kind of tangential to that, understand that depending on how you structure the funds flow and the data flow in your systems, you may be outside of a regulatory box. And that may, and the way your technology or service works might present very different risk metrics that regulators and stakeholders will understand. So
you're saying that there are business models emerging where you're clearly either inside or outside the regulatory box.
Yes. So one thing that we've been really pushing with regulators is that, don't regulate the protocol. This is an open source protocol. Regulate the products and services on top of it. And so, for the Bitcoin world, what this means is, let's focus on the choke points, the entry points into the traditional financial systems. If the public policy goal is to protect consumers and prevent anti-terrorist financing and money laundering, we can accomplish those goals by monitoring the entry points into the legacy system, and doing that without strangling the innovation behind these technologies. So that is one box that is becoming a little more developed. There are other boxes. I mean, the different crowdfunding systems that are coming out, multi-signature devices, for example, are very, very interesting, because the legacy system and the legal regimes assume that there are sole custodians of funds along transactions. And what these new kind of decentralized applications are allowing people to do is create user-controlled metrics that are governed by contracts rather than regulation. And so, using multi-sig as just one example, there may be 3 holders of private keys, and the end user may have ultimate control of the funds to spend. And so there's an argument to be made that there is no single sole custodian of funds among this chain that enables a transaction. And so all of these regulations that apply to custodians of funds may not apply in a multi-sig environment, may not apply if if a user has entered into a contract with multi-service providers that each play one role along the chain that's governed by the contract that the user itself has entered into. So, there are what's really exciting to me is how we are moving away in some ways from just the currency aspect of this and really exploring some of the more exciting and transformative services and products and social needs that are being met by decentralized applications and public ledgers. So, again, if you're an exchange or your wallet, you're probably in a tough regulatory box. If you are building products and services on top of the blockchain, there are many ways in which you can structure your product or service that will allow you to operate, launch your product, test the market without kind of the cumbersome framework of the AML and BSA world.
Patrick, so you've served on behalf of the Bitcoin Foundation for quite some time. You've seen this ecosystem move and evolve from the very beginning. So just give us a big picture. Well, what's it like? How are these boxes evolving from your perspective?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. Wow, the volume was up on that, so I hope I woke everybody up there. It's actually been very interesting. It was a nice time last night. We had a dinner. I was looking around the room, and I had this moment where I could say, wow, a year ago, 2 years ago, what did this whole thing look like, and where are we today? It's amazing to me. It really is. And I think we're all privileged to be here, and we're all still very early. We're all still early adopters in this whole thing. It's still shaping up. It's still shaking out.
Is it too early to start regulating? I mean, there's this big issue whether there needs to be specific regulation construed for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, right? Or should it just should regulators and governments stand back and see how sort of Bitcoin finds its way through the existing regulatory structure? What's your view on that?
So there's one thing that's pretty clear. If you look around the room, just even looking at the startup showcase over the past 2 days, and that is that no one, including everybody in this room and myself included, knows what Bitcoin is going to look like 2 years from now. Creating a regulatory framework today around Bitcoin is a fool's errand. You will more likely stifle what could possibly be a very innovative technology by trying to create a regulatory framework right now for a technology that is moving faster than any of us can keep up with. So we really should think not about how we can create a regulatory framework for Bitcoin, but we should think about what are those underlying policy goals, right, that we're looking at. Is it preventing terrorists from accessing the network or bad actors abusing the system? I think everybody in this room wants to build responsible systems. People want to be responsible actors in the financial world, whether they're in the new digital economy or whether they're in the traditional economy. So focus on those policy goals. How do you create a safe system? How do you create a responsible system and police your own network, but do it your way? And then show the regulators how you're effective at how you're doing it in the new environment, in your new way. Because frankly, when you look at the compliance landscape right now, it's an old framework. It doesn't even serve the purpose it was meant to serve anymore. There's a lot of effort that's going into reforming that right now. We can be a part of that conversation by showing, not telling, by building things, by showing how we've built responsible systems and showing people how these new systems can work and reform the underlying regulations there. When I was at a compliance conference a little while back, I ended the general session panel by asking a lot of the BSA officers at banks to really think hard about what identity is going to mean for them. Not in 5 years, but in 6 months, in a year. Like, what are we really talking about when we say know your customer? What does that identity look like? I think that is rapidly changing. I think we're all a part of it. And so that's what we should be focusing on. It's focus on those policy goals and let the regulators follow behind.
So focus on the policy goals and let regulators fall behind and let the ecosystem try to take initiative to build its own
build its own responsible system. So be responsible, be a good actor, and demonstrate how you're a good actor and how you've done that, how you've achieved their policy goal for them without having to follow their rules, which don't necessarily apply or fit very clearly here. Now, it was last year when we were at, then it was BTC London, but it was the predecessor to CoinSummit, and I addressed the same crowd, and I said, we as a community should look around and decide, what are the lines in the sand? Like, where do we draw lines around Bitcoin? What makes Bitcoin valuable to us as a community, and where do we fight, and where do we not care, right? And we've started making a lot of movement on that. One of those issues is user-defined privacy on the network. So when you're using the protocol, consumers should be able to define how private they are in their transactions across the network. And we've had great success with the regulatory community by demonstrating how that can work in a new environment, and it can be done in a safe and a sound way. And another one that we talked about was fungibility, right? That any Bitcoin is the same as any other Bitcoin, right? And it's pretty notable that the US government has now sold Bitcoin themselves, right? Sold Bitcoins that were seized from an accused drug ring, right? That demonstrates that they have internalized that concept that Bitcoin should be fungible, and that the protocol should be open and distributed, right? That you should allow for permissionless innovation, that you shouldn't have any central authority. You shouldn't need to register your Bitcoin account with somebody in order to develop new services on top of this protocol. So I think those are some of the lines in the sand that we've already drawn, and we've been winning on on those grounds.
There's one issue that was discussed on an earlier panel, which is the 51% threat to the mining system, which is both a perceived and a real threat. Well, once somebody exceeds it, then potentially they have ability to abuse the position, presumably. Is this also, and the community is now starting to discuss this issue, so it's starting to self-heal in some way, as it has done with previous issues, right? But is that also a live rail when it comes to actual regulation?
Well, I think actually it's interesting. I wrote a blog post about this a long time ago. The third danger of 51% attack for the attacker, and that danger is a regulatory danger, right? So if you control the network, if you actually can control what transactions appear on the blockchain and which ones don't, effectively you're the administrator and you're the issuer of that currency. Do you want to be the guy who has to go talk to the Treasury Department if you have 51% of the network? I don't.
Okay, so at this stage, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Mike has related his experience from telecommunications, Constance from being in the field, Patrick, big picture overview of Bitcoin, but we're all here together as Bitcoiners in the early stages of the community, so it'd be really great to have some questions from the audience. Gentleman back in the yellow jacket back in the back, yes, please.
Can you hear me? I was just wondering, what role is there for antitrust law in Bitcoin in something like the 50% issue? Should antitrust law come into play? Should it not? With regard to 50% or anything?
Patrick first, and Constance, if you want to follow up, then possibly on.
So there was, in the early days of Bitcoin, something I used to call Bitcoin magical thinking. And the way Bitcoin magical thinking worked was that I can run a distributed stock exchange, and it's totally cool, and I'm not violating any laws because Bitcoin, right? That wasn't true then, it's not true today. So to say that antitrust laws don't apply because Bitcoin is kind of Bitcoin magical thinking. If you're colluding with business partners or competitors to create an anti-competitive landscape or distort the market, then antitrust laws will apply, just like they always do in any other industry.
Constance, would you like to add, or?
Sure. When we formed Data, we actually ran into a lot of these issues in that we wanted to information share, we wanted to disseminate this information that we were learning on the ground from regulators and stakeholders. But, and we wanted to be able to publish best practices and guidelines. But really, one of the preliminary issues that we encountered as we were, engaging in this work to try to help the industry was that, in fact, if we did do some of these things, it may raise antitrust issues. So it was a little bit of a chicken and egg problem in that, in one way, we want to build standards, and the other way, building standards might be anti-competitive. So, legal regimes do apply whether you're in the crypto world or not, but the way they may apply may differ significantly.
Michael, in the olden days, we remember the days of BT and other incumbents, right? Those were monopolies, and you came in with a new technology.
I beg to differ. I mean, on antitrust, on collusion and cartel and stuff like that, you've got problems in any business, but I wouldn't worry about it. This thing is so small at the moment in the big scheme of things, realistically, for all we want it to be big. I would just barrel on and get on with it. I wouldn't be thinking about, have a meeting with your friends, have a meeting and figure out how this thing's going to grow, have a meeting about everything.
Well, I think I would agree with that, and I think there's a broader point. I kind of use as a metric for the health of the industry generally, like how many lawyers are on panels at a conference. So the fewer lawyers at a conference, probably the better the health of the industry generally. So the fact that we're like almost the last panel and there are only two of us, that's like a good sign. Right.
This might be the last legal panel at the CoinSummit conference. Yeah, well, hopefully. Perhaps. Gentleman there over there, yes.
Hey, Jake Benson from LibreTax. Kind of a two-part question. I know you've had contact with the IRS classified as a property. What are the chances that is adjusted or changed in the short term, maybe next 1 or 2 years? And then what are the chances, or what is the time frame of coming up with a new asset class?
Again, I'd ask the legal minds, starting at the leftmost part of the panel, seen from here.
Sure. So the interesting thing is, I mean, if it's not classified as property, what should it be classified as, right? Foreign currency. One disfavors the other kind of, one favors new entrants into the market and payments, and one favors long-term investors and speculators, right? And even if you had a foreign currency designation, you would still have to track your cap gains and losses and things like that. You just have something called a $200 exemption that would apply. So wouldn't we just be in a better situation if we don't try and change the classification at all, but just get the $200 exemption applied? And that would solve a problem. Because the real problem with the IRS's ruling on this issue was that they undermined a fundamental policy goal, right? To be technology neutral in how you regulate everything, right? They've actually created a rule that favors speculative investment over the use of the network as a payment method. And that's just, I don't think that there's any intention to do that, but that's the end result of it. So we'll be filing comments as a foundation with the IRS to ask them to look at that issue, to apply the $200 exemption in this case.
We're done, very briefly.
Yes, so actually we had the IRS rep at the data meeting in April, and she was on the defensive. She was just bombarded with questions from the audience, and she said, well, we just want to give out guidance before the April 16th deadline. And we may have gotten it wrong. And so we actually submitted a number of comments that they're digesting right now. What's interesting is the IRS is a part of Treasury, the other part of Treasury being FinCEN. FinCEN has come out saying that this is neither currency nor property. And of course, you have IRS now saying this is property. So at some point, the US Treasury has to harmonize where they stand on these issues. And right now, we are driving the car, we're building the road, trying to figure out where to go all at the same time. So it's, in terms of what asset class it belongs in, it's probably going to be, you're going to see a lot of false starts, which you already have, and it's going to be a while.
there's actually some clarity on this issue here in the UK, but we're done for the time being. And thank you very much, Michael, Constance, Patrick, and on to the next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.